Well, let's keep on sampling, shall we? Let's take a look at Edward Johnson's Good News from New England. A propaganda piece, if ever there were one. We're looking here at history, elegies, wordplay types of poems, and certainly we've read. By the way, we've read some Edward Johnson before. If you remember the Perry Miller anthology, this one is basically a sort of a history piece wrapped up with kind of a justification for why Puritans came to New England and what they went through and these sorts of things. He even gives at the top, underneath the title of a poem, something that frankly kills the artistic appeal to me. A subtitle of the reasons moving this people to transplant themselves and families to those remote parts. Geez, wow, how lyrical. Anyway, it opens with this notion that Providence has guided all of the history of New England, even Columbus's discovery. God was making this ready for his people. Read Puritans in New England. And it was all getting ready. It was all set up for them to walk into this wilderness and make a new kingdom of God on earth, and all the pressures that go along with that. The opening stanza or so, the lines. The great Jehovah's working word effecting wondrously this earth's vast globe, those parts unknown to civil people by. Yeah, 14ers again. There we go. Columbus or Almericus by Providence direction, excuse me, found out this western world with store of metals clear extraction. The Spanish project working well took sudden such impression in minds of many Europe held, who fell to like progression. It's strange to see the Spanish fleet so many should provoke. In English, searching for like prize, they are vanished into smoke. The English whipped those Spaniards and sank that Spanish armada, and their great pirates stole from them appropriated property for English usage. The poem goes on, of course, and it's just a big basic argument in favor of why the Puritans are entitled to be there, where they came from, what they went through, so on and so forth, over on line 33, 34, something like that. When England by Elizabeth began a reformation, it was a joyful day to all the godly of that nation. Pro dolor it did not go on with joyful acclamation. Of course, pro dolor means with unhappiness, with sadness. In other words, you see that the basic Puritan position here of it was great that under Elizabeth, really Henry VIII, but especially Elizabeth, the Protestant Reformation took root there in England. However, it didn't go far enough. So too bad it didn't go far enough. And he says, but hierarchy and lordly throne of prelacy invading. You got the establishment guys. You can't quite kick them all out, can you? All the rats keep coming back into the cellar. The government of Christ's dear flock, then godliness was fading. Okay, they didn't clean house enough. Essentially, is the and it goes on with of the transportation of people and goods to the Massachusetts Bay and other adjacent colonies. It's not an exciting read, but it makes for an interesting justification, if you will. In straits to get their goods aboard, their wives and children small, hard to attain a clearing thought, clearly dismissed of all, but God and godly friends, whom they find in their hardships free, to send and lend them help in all their great calamity, right? So we've been delivered. Every time we got down, every time we got right to the very edge, God delivered us from certain doom. At ship's mast doth Christ's pastors preach, while waves like prelates proud would fling them from their pulpit's place, as not by them allowed. And so on. Even the weather was against us in some respects. Over on 162, of the arrival of our English nation in the Massachusetts Bay, etc., down in line 184, you see diversity of opinions. This people landing soon showed diversity of minds, as various heads so actions did declare their diverse kinds. That was a problem. You and I would look at, diversity, how interesting, diverse minds. Why, that must have been a good thing. No, not to Mr. Johnson. This is a very, very bad thing. It was yet another obstacle, in fact, that had to be overcome. This notion of diversity of thought. Then he gets into like the discussion of the flora and fauna, a rather effulgent portrait of nature. Now, why would he do that? Well, one of the reasons to do that is because he wants, as over you see on page 167, to populate this howling desert land. They want people to come. And so this is one of many, many texts like it throughout American history, frankly, where people would promise that in the wilderness is the land of milk and honey. People used to do this about California. Come to California. Lots and lots of they did this back during the Grapes of Wrath, the Dust Bowl. Come to California. All your cares will be swept away. Sunshine and orange groves forever. Come out west, young man, where you'll find free land and fresh air and chance to, etc., etc. The promise of moving westward, ever westward. So this text really falls in that tradition. It's quite an interesting piece because of that. It's not because it's well wrought or because it's that clever, but because it's very propagandistic. Come here. By the way, if you come here, you're going to be joining a bunch of people who God specially has protected and ordained to be in charge over here, so let's not forget that, and so on. So it's a piece that's kind of history and political propaganda all in one. If you look over at page 209, Urian Oaks, kind of a weird name, Urian, but he was quite a well-respected preacher. One of the things that starts happening with the second generation of Puritans is that, well, they start dying. And when people who die eventually go and who have been prominent before they died, especially in a movement like this, especially in a very historic movement like this, there's this sense of deep loss. There's this sense of we're losing all of our great star preachers, our great leaders, and it's a moment, it's a time for reflection, it's a time to say, what's going on, where do we stand in terms of our mission here, especially for the Puritans. Well, Thomas Shepard was an interesting fellow because Shepard was considered a superstar, just a rock star preacher and thinker, and by all accounts was just a very, very talented man. Great intellectual, very effective pulpit speaker, and died at age 43. Now that's not terribly uncommon. Life expectancy was shorter than it is today. Although don't be fooled, because people quote these and say, well, average life expectancy was like 38. Well, that's because of all the infant mortality. Once you survived past, say, teenage years, you had a pretty good reason to believe that you were going to live well into your 50s and 60s. And if you made it past 30 or so, you probably made it to 70 in most cases. So 43 was still considered quite a young age. It wasn't unheard of, but it was a young age, and he died at 43. And Urian Oaks takes this as an opportunity to say, you know what? Maybe God is sending us a message through this. And if you look at some of the stanzas, it's a lamentation, but there's a lot of heavy typology in this, and especially wordplay on the fact that his last name was Shepherd, and he's a pastor, right? He says, oh, that I were a poet in my grain, how would I invoke the muses all? So unlike Wigglesworth and others, Oakes doesn't mind using, classical references. Oakes is he's a Renaissance guy, actually, very much so. He begins saying, oh, I'm a crummy poet, etc. Over on stanza 5, he says, we need no mourning women's elegy. Gosh, that was pretty sexist. No forced, affected, artificial tone. Oh, so that's what he thinks women's elegies are like. Anyway, stanza 6. Poetic raptures are of no esteem. Daring hyperboles have here no place. Luxuriant wits on such a copious theme would shame themselves and blush to show their face. Here's worth enough to overmatch the skill of the most stately poet laureate's quill. Right? This is not a time for being overly emotional. It's not a time for poetic flights of fancy. And by the way, he kind of admits that he couldn't pull that off even if he were asked to anyway. There's some nice conceits here, though. He's a pretty handy poet, after all. But where we get into the meat of things is over here on stanza 14 and following, all through 18. It's quite interesting. So are we all amazed at this blow, sadly portending some approaching woe. In other words, he's going to make this a spin on this and say, look, we're being sent a message by God here. God has taken away one of our holiest men. Why would he do that? He's doing it to shake us up, and if we're not careful, something worse is going to happen. He's removing his leadership from us because he has lost confidence that we are fulfilling the mission we came here for. We shall not summon bold astrologers to tell us what the stars say in the case, those cousin Germans to black conjurers. We have a sacred oracle that says, when the righteous perish, Men of mercy, go. It is a sure presage of coming woe, right? When the righteous perish, men of mercy, go. It is a sure presage of coming woe. Something bad's going to happen if this keeps up. We're being told we're not doing what we should. He was a woeful word to say he was, our wrestling Israel, second unto none. The man that stood in the gap to keep the pass, to stop the troops of judgments pushing on. This man the honor had to hold the hand of an incensed God against our land. Thomas Shepard was the guy who was telling us to straighten up. He's the one who held God's hand of judgment back upon us. Now he's gone. You better sober up. When such a pillar's fallen, oh such a one, when such a glorious shining light's put out, when chariot and horsemen thus are gone, well may we fear some downfall, darkness, rout. When such a bank's broke down, there's sad occasion to wail, and dread some grievous inundation. What, must we with our God and glory part? Lord, is thy treaty with New England come thus to an end? And is war in thy heart, that this ambassador is called home? Is God about to let us have it? Is he about to wage war against these people who have betrayed his trust? Is this the first sign of that? This is this is a Jeremiah piece, right? This is really a Jeremiah piece. Over on page 33, on 216, stanza 33. Forbear, bold pen, 'twas God that took him thus, to give him great reward, and punish us, right? Took away this person from us. Later on in stanza 47, he says, our sins have slain our shepherd. Okay, kind of a not so great pun, but it's meant to be that way on purpose. Mourn in stanza 50. Mourn that this great man's fallen in Israel, right? See the typology? This is the new Israel. Lest it be said, with him New England fell, right? So you better walk away from this man's death with the right message. Okay, it's a very good poem. It's very, very much in that vein. It is 110% Puritan in all these different ways. The typology, the Jeremiah, all of those kinds of things. The theology in it and such. Let's take a quick peek at something that's kind of a curiosity more than anything else, and we'll leave it at that. John Saffin on page 195. The Puritans had a very great fondness for wordplay. Not wordplay that was clever for its own sake, but that was an intellectual activity. They would have loved word puzzles. They would have loved word search stuff and crossword puzzles had they existed. But they certainly enjoyed acrostics. And you can see an acrostic on Mrs. Elizabeth Hall there, and you don't have to read the poem. The poem's not very good, but it starts with each line, first letter spells out her name. Okay, Elizabeth Hull, and then you also see an acrostic on Mrs. Winifred Griffin. Mr. Saffin liked to write acrostics on women. I guess he impressed them that way, I suppose. There's a bit of a leftover I at the end. I don't know why on that one. Nothing in this all that profound. I think it's quite interesting that both of these poems about women have nothing about their piety. That's very odd to me. Elizabethan poetry, in many respects, if you ask me, both of these very Elizabethan, somewhat more secular than what you would expect from a Puritan, somewhat more of a watch me do something clever kind of thing, which is a little on the vain side. Nothing about their piety, nothing about religion in either one of them. Just kind of let's see if I can do this and impress these ladies, not necessarily for romantic purposes, just to be nice. So anyway, just kind of an example there of what they like. They really like doing that quite a bit, and you see that very frequently in their poetry.